All right, so today we're going to be talking about congruence and then how that applies to polygons. What does it mean to be congruent? Well, basically, to be congruent, it just means to be equal. We can show congruency with this symbol and state that two things are congruent or equal. Let's look at some real-world examples. If we have this Mickey Mouse, we can say that it is congruent to this Mickey Mouse because it's the same shape and size. Put them side by side, you can see that. We could say that they are congruent or equal. That's congruence. Similarly, we could say that this lid is congruent to that lid. Although the color is different, the shape is congruent. Sometimes things can be similar, though, and not be congruent. These two coffee filters are not congruent because, although their ratios are very similar, one is bigger than the other one, so they wouldn't be congruent. Looking back at the lid example again, if we placed a big lid next to a small lid, again, these would not be congruent. To make the big lid congruent to something, we would have to have another big lid. So the big thing to remember when we're talking about congruence and polygons is that two shapes have to match exactly. They have to have the exact same dimensions. The size has to be the same. It's not enough that they're similar. The size has to be the same. And looking at one last kind of practical example of polygons, we have this comic book, and then we have this comic book. Those two comic books are congruent because they were made in similar publication years, and they use this same type of ratio for their overall size. However, the old 1965 comic would not be congruent to a 1998 comic because they use slightly narrower cardstock. You learn something every day, don't you? So how does that relate to our math work? Well, when we look at shapes, we can check to see if they're congruent. And the way that we can do that is by using a protractor and a ruler to measure them, or in an even easier method, we can use something such as plastic or paper to trace them. Tracing over one shape and then moving over to check the other shape. That's outlined on page 22 in your book, where again, they show that method of tracing and testing. So when you work on your math assignment for Thursday, remember, that's the way that you can check, through measurements or by tracing. Please justify your answers. Good luck.